everybody, and welcome back to All Was Right. I'm Chris Thomas. This is Terry. We have a great show for you tonight. We're going to be talking about some great culture war wins, especially as it relates to gender madness. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court a little bit. We're going to talk about, not surprisingly, some of the stuff going on in Israel. There's been some new developments we're going to talk through. And then, as this past week was MLK Day, we're going to talk about the decline of civilization and the regression back into racial tribalism that's plaguing us really across this country. And I think it's going to be a great show, and we're glad to have you with us.
Yay! Welcome, everybody.
Absolutely. So big news, and I'm going to start off with this because this is actually pretty big news. The 11th
Okay, I'm excited.
Good. I'm glad you're excited. See, when you're excited, I know it's going to be a good show. I thank you for not saying you were bored. I'm happy to hear that. The 11th Circuit in Alabama has just ruled that the Alabama ban on gender-affirming care for minors is constitutional and can go into effect. Now, you might, and yes, and this is actually a bigger deal than you might think it is, because
Okay.
a lot of states are enacting these bans of basically, the butchery of children. And for us on the right, that's a pretty common sense thing, right? Like, don't carve up children's genitals, and it shouldn't be that crazy that one of these is allowed to go into effect. But in this case, exactly, and we're going to tie this back to a court decision by Trump-appointed Justice Neil Gorsuch, because there is a big roadblock that we suffered in 2020 that I'm going to talk about, and it's going to put into perspective why this is so important that this was ruled as constitutional. And that was a rule, and the case was Bostock versus Clayton County. It was decided on June 16th, or June 15th, rather, of 20. Now, I do want to preface this by talking a little bit about Supreme Court interpretation, because we have two schools of thought, really, and that is interpreting the Constitution through the lens it was originally written versus the more evolutionary view of the Constitution changing with the times. Obviously, that's the gobbledygook they do over on the liberal wing of the court. But a lot of people don't realize there are two schools of thought within the conservative side, too. That is originalism versus textualism. Now, originalism, as championed by the late Justice Scalia, is interpreting the plain meaning of the words, what they would mean to a layperson at the time it was originally written. So you're factoring intent and context into that interpretation. Context through the lens if it was originally written or ratified, what that would mean at the time. Now, textualism is where you go, it's similar, but it's subtly different. Textualism, for those of you who don't know, is where you interpret the text through a literal lens and ignore context. You just look at the plain meaning of the words, period, and not consider the intent with which it was written. So Gorsuch is a textualist. He's not an originalist, and this has actually been something that came up during his hearings too. He was questioned on several cases that had kind of bizarre outcomes, where he ruled in a way that was super literal with the text, but that had a bizarre outcome because of it, an outcome you wouldn't normally think.
Right.
So if we look at this case where a trans person was fired from their job, here, this is the reason. I'm going to read a little bit, a sentence an excerpt from the opinion. He writes, "It is impossible to discriminate against a person for being homosexual or transgender without discriminating based on sex," Gorsuch wrote in his majority opinion. He gave the example of two employees attracted to men, one male, the other female. If the employer fires the male employee for no reason other than the fact that he is attracted to men, but not the woman who is attracted to men, that is clearly firing based on sex, he said. So that's interesting reading. Now, obviously, if you look at it through an originalist lens, you would never think that saying you can't fire somebody based on their sex. You would never assume that the intent of that statute is to protect trans people and gay people.
I'm sorry, is Gorsuch not getting educated on this on TikTok? Because there's like a live every morning where somebody can explain to him that gender and sex are not the same thing. I mean, I think this guy, I'm going to send him some links. I'm going to send him some links. There's some people way more educated about this than he is.
Please try to get Justice Gorsuch's cell phone number. And if you want, you can text it to me too, and we'll text him
Okay.
the scoop of what's going on because he seems to be out of the loop.
Yeah,
But
he clearly is out of touch with I mean, there are actual non-medical people who don't know what the hell they're talking about on TikTok who could explain this to
exactly.
him so that he could understand sex and gender have nothing to do with each other.
And we all
Yeah.
knew we all know those are the people dictating policy in the United States. Let's face it. They're running
You
the
got that
culture.
right.
So the interesting thing here is the actual text in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 says you can't discriminate on somebody against somebody because of or in part because of their sex. So Gorsuch's very, very literal reasoning here is that if you use the trans example, if you'd be firing a man for acting like a woman, but you wouldn't fire a woman for acting like a woman. So he used a very, very literal meaning that in part
Yeah.
it's because of their sex. Now, obviously, if you look at it through an originalist lens, that in part would be factor into the intent of the employer who is discriminating, not
Right.
just a literal broad interpretation of in part. You'd be talking about is part of their intent based on sex. And in these circumstances, the answer to that would be no. So this is where you see an example of textualism in action, but not originalism. So it was a very
That's a good
interesting,
example.
yeah, it's a very interesting case. So how is this related to this gender affirming care ban? For those of you who don't know, because I know Ron DeSantis doesn't like to talk about this, much of what he's done in Florida has been struck down based on this ruling by Gorsuch. In fact, and this is why it's important. So basically, Governor DeSantis signed into law a ban on using Medicaid funds for gender transition surgeries, and the district courts blocked that from going into effect based on Gorsuch's ruling here that it's sex discrimination. Basically, any discrimination or any legislation that has a disparate impact on trans people is sex discrimination, and they always cite Gorsuch's ruling here. So I don't think Gorsuch realized what he was doing, but he was basically screwing a big part of the conservative cause by doing this.
Yeah. Well, and again, even that movement says it's sex, not gender, or it's gender, not sex, right?
Yeah.
And again, to me, this saying that it does, right, that you're firing a woman and a woman also diminishes women, right? Because now you're saying a man is a woman and no.
Yeah, so if you think about it, if you look at it through a really literal lens, he's a little bit based, even though this has a liberal outcome, because he's still acknowledging that the trans man is really a woman presenting as a man. He's still kind of dismissing the argument that sex and gender are different, but unfortunately, the outcome of that case is very, very bad for conservatives. So there's a little bit of baseness in there, but the result
it's not just bad for us. I think it's bad for the country because this empowers places like California and Washington and other states to continue to undermine parents' rights and use taxpayer dollars to mutilate children.
Exactly. And to go even further than Florida, all of Joe Biden's Title IX reforms about allowing girls on boys' sports teams and vice versa, they also cited Gorsuch's ruling and why that's constitutional. So this ruling was very, very significant. And basically, in my view, until this ruling is overruled or overturned, we can't win legislatively on the gender issue at all. Really, that's what it comes down to.
No,
I don't think Gorsuch
and this continues to erase womanhood.
His really literal approach to this textual interpretation really created a bad outcome. So why is it important that Alabama did this? Because basically their district court ruled, basically they didn't care about Gorsuch's decision. They're ruling the opposite way. And so what this is doing, for those of you watching who don't see what could happen from this, if this finds its way back to the Supreme Court, it's an opportunity for the Supreme Court to overrule itself. Hopefully. Because
correct itself.
Exactly. It's setting up a direct challenge to this ridiculous ruling. So I'm hoping it's a lot bigger than this one Alabama law. This is going to have a major impact. First of all, if the court reaffirms it, we're really screwed because now we have precedent upon precedent that is really, really bad for the culture war. And if it undoes it, then it's fair game and we should elect as many Republicans as we can at every level of government so we could start fighting this stuff.
Well, and Chris, they could narrow it or reinterpret it or anything to give some great. I mean, they left this wide open. And
Yeah.
basically, I mean, to me as a female, I feel like that you could come with a suit and say, I'm being discriminated against because biological males are being allowed into my sports, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you push it the other way. And so I think that there is that other discrimination that can happen as well.
And interestingly, and I just want to talk a little bit further about this case. The vote was very, very interesting. This is where we had a 6-3 conservative majority on the court. We actually got actually, I'm sorry, this is before Amy Coney Barrett was on the court. So it was the same court we have
Okay.
now, but we had Ruth Bader Ginsburg instead of Coney Barrett. Interestingly, and I've read a lot of commentators' thoughts about this, we had a 6-3 decision where Gorsuch and Roberts joined the liberal wing of the court. Now, a lot of people were originally saying, well, it's not surprising Roberts isn't that conservative, but there actually, I think, was a motive of Roberts joining that vote. Because so for those of you who don't know, the person who gets to write the majority opinion of a case is either, if they're on the winning side and the Chief Justice isn't there, it's the most senior person on the court that gets to write the decision. If the Chief Justice is on the winning side, either the Chief Justice will write the majority opinion or they'll assign it to who they want to write the opinion. Now,
Okay.
what would have happened if it was 5-4 and Roberts went with the conservatives? Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have been the most senior person on the winning side, and she would have been writing the opinion. And if you actually read through Gorsuch's opinion, there's a lot of religious exemptions in there for that religious organizations don't have to follow.
Okay.
So it was pretty much as moderate an opinion as could be with that outcome. And if
What he was
Ruth Bader
doing, yeah.
exactly, and if Ruth Bader Ginsburg was writing that decision, it would not have those protections in there.
Yeah.
And so
No.
exactly. So a lot of people think Roberts joined. He didn't necessarily want this outcome, but he joined the liberal side of the argument, so he could say, okay, I'm going to pick the most conservative person on this side to be able to write the opinion. So
Right. It puts
exactly.
some protections in there.
Exactly.
That could be. Yeah.
So that's what people. I mean, we don't know that. That's what people are speculating. But either way, it's a good win, at least at that district court level, that will at least hopefully set the stage for a total reversal of this ruling in the next year or so.
Well, I mean, if it goes to the Supreme Court, if they don't take it, then we have precedents that conflict, right?
Exactly.
And that's going to cause problems.
Well, what it's really going to do is it's going to also make it so the Supreme Court will have no choice but to reconsider it at some point, because now there's going to be conflicting precedent, like you said.
Yeah. So at some point, you're just opening. There's just going to be lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit until the Supreme Court revisits this and said, yes, this is what we're doing, or okay, we need to narrow this or overturn it or make some changes.
Exactly, and it might be a long game.
But again, I think if they would just get on TikTok and listen to the people there, they would make a more informed decision. I think that would really help.
And this may be a long game thing, because I know Roberts is very reluctant in having the court decide on really, really contentious issues. It's not necessarily that he has a liberal viewpoint on these issues, but he doesn't like the court wading into the culture war. He doesn't like that.
Right.
So what I think will happen, because this may go before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court may decline to hear it. But what will still be enabled by this decision is maybe other states, other district courts, and other parts of the country will have the courage, because of this precedent, to also go against the Supreme Court ruling. Now, I'm not a big advocate of going against the Supreme Court willfully just because you don't like the decision, but this is clearly a ridiculous interpretation of the Civil Rights Act.
Yep.
I mean, it's just not.
Well, and that's how things have been overturned in the past. Is some lower court has said, no, I don't think so, and it's gone back to the Supreme Court. So
exactly. So
that's how it works.
Exactly. So if we have, let's say we fast forward a year or two, and we have 5 district courts who have now ruled the same way, contradicting the Supreme Court, even if the Supreme Court doesn't want to hear this case next year or the year after, they're going to at some point have no choice but to, because there's going to be enough conflicting precedent that they're going to have to take this issue head on again and either affirm it or not affirm it. And I think that's why it's important to get out there and vote Republican, even if at some point it's a nominee you don't love, because the Supreme Court is in the balance every single election. That's my viewpoint, at least. Was I cutting off for you?
Yeah, you cut off a little
Oh,
bit.
okay. I just got finished saying something good that didn't require a response, so I'm just gonna keep going. Um, okay. Okay, so all right, okay. So I hope everybody crosses their fingers, and we hope we get a good outcome. To move into a little bit more fun territory, um, I want
Yes.
to announce to everybody that Terry and I are starting a contest that we're going to be updating you guys at the beginning of the show each week for the next 4 or so weeks. As I think I've mentioned, we're
Mm-hmm.
going to CPAC in a few weeks. Woohoo! And
Yes.
we take a lot of verbal abuse on TikTok, and we decided why not make a game out of it. And
Then it's more fun.
it's more fun. It's fun to be abused when at least you have a chance to win a nice dinner afterwards, right? Because that's really what this is about.
Exactly. When you're getting Chris, the best meal I've ever had always has free sprinkled all over it, and I will be getting the free meal at CPAC.
By the
I'm
way,
already looking at steakhouses, buddy.
did you tally? So did you do you have a tally ready to say on this call? Oh, I was saying, do you have a tally ready to say on this call?
Oh, I'm ready.
Oh, good. Okay, so let me
I'm
explain.
I'm ready.
Let me explain the ground rules here. So we've assigned
Yeah.
point values to all the different types of verbal beatings that we take. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Simple curse words and petty insults are 1 point each. Then we
Yeah.
have or
Such as
blocking.
racist.
You're
Yeah, such
racist.
as
You're a bigot.
racist,
You're a
fascist.
transphobe. Screw
Yeah.
you. That stuff is 1 point each.
Yeah.
A
Islamophobe. Yeah, all of the normal
yep.
loving words from the tolerant
All of
left.
if
Yes.
we get
Mm-hmm.
blocked by somebody we're interacting with, that's also 1 point. So kind of the low level, not too
Mm-hmm.
serious stuff, 1 point. Then the middle tier
Mm-hmm.
is death wishes, and this happens from time to time, where somebody won't outright threaten us, but they'll say, "I hope you die. I hope you kill yourself. I hope you this. I hope you that, or I hope you
Yeah.
get hit by a car." That kind of stuff. That's a
Yeah.
2 pointer because it's a little more serious than just a screw you, you're a bigot. Then
Mm-hmm.
the third tier is a death threat. Anything or a
Yes.
threat of bodily harm is 3 points. And that's the crowned, coveted jewel that we all hope to get. So we're racking up these points, and whoever has the most
Mm-hmm.
points by CPAC is going to have to buy the other dinner. So, Terry, would you like to share where you're at so far?
No actual death threats this week. So I'm disappointed. But in my defense, I've been dealing with bronchitis and I haven't
Uh-huh.
been able to get on and really poke at the pro pallies, which is pretty easy. All you have to
It's
do is go on their
Tuesday.
post and I don't want to give away my secret, and just type whenever they put some nonsense up, just type Gaza lighting and the meltdown. Like I literally just type Gaza lighting, and if you go under there, there's over 283 responses of people just having a
Wow.
meltdown over it. So that's my little gift from me to you to level the playing field. But I did have two death wishes. One person wanted to blow my head off, and another person hoped I died from dementia. Oh no, I
Okay.
had three. I had somebody hope that I OD on pills.
Right, I think I saw that one too.
Told me I should. Yes, told me that I should go home and overdose on pills. Um, Now I was called. I have for a total of just name calling. I only have 21 this week. Most of them were fascist. I was called that quite a bit.
Uh-huh.
The one that I found the most hilarious, though, I think this is my favorite. Is I for some reason I have some Muslims who are very pro-Palestinian who stalk my page. I don't know why. They're
Uh-huh.
guys, and so one of them was talking about how that there was never violence between the Jewish people who practice Judaism and Muslims until Jews from Europe showed up, in Palestine. And I said, yeah, except for that whole slaughter in Medina back in 600 CE when Muhammad and his followers went to Medina. They beheaded all of the males there of puberty age and then took all the women as sex slaves. I said, other than that, yeah. And he said, that's racist. And I said, I'm talking about religions, buddy, not race at all. That has nothing to do with race.
Wait,
I didn't say anything about race.
wait, so is it so by that logic, is it actually racist just to say that if just to state that Hitler tried to eradicate the Jews? Is that racist against Germans then?
Germans.
To state the fact?
I I thought German was an ethnicity, but apparently I don't know
Actually, no. Do you know why?
because
You can't be
quoting
racist against Germans because they're white. I forgot their rules. You can't be racist against white people.
ding ding ding. Yep, they're fine. Yeah, so that was my favorite call for racism because I'm like I went back and I'm like, did I say Arabs? Because I'm very careful because that's not all Arabs are Muslim,
Yeah.
right? Not all Jews or, practice Judaism. And I looked, I'm like, nope, I'm saying, and I went back and I said, I'm talking about religion, not race. You're implying it. Nope. So I'm at 21 insults,
Okay.
mostly racist and fascism. I have 3 death wishes, but no. Oh, and I have 2 blocks.
Okay. So
Your friend Bill blocked me,
okay. So let ah,
and
let's do the
yeah, and
tally.
then
So
somebody who I put Gosling.
it's 20. How many insults you said?
21 insults, 2 blocks, 3 death wishes.
So 21 plus 2 plus 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yep.
23, 29. Okay, so your total for this week so far is 29. Okay.
Yeah, but I know
Let,
you got a death threat this week.
all right. So here we go. So um
Mm-hmm.
I have 20 points worth of insults and block. I got blocked by a lot of people this week. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Wow.
6, 7. I have 8 blocks, 12 verbal insults. Some of the highlights for
Okay.
verbal insults, by the way. So okay, so I got called an incel twice by 2 different people. So two incels. Um, I got
Okay.
that I'm a whiny ass bitch. Um, by the way, I don't know if this
Nice.
counts
I
because it's
mean, that's
not.
true.
So I don't know if this counts because it's not a curse word. But somebody said I look like
Okay.
a sex change surgery gone wrong. Can I count that?
Yes, you can count that. I don't think that's a compliment, so yeah, I think you can count that.
I'm pathetic. I'm spineless. I'm fucked in the head. I'm fucking ignorant. And so basically a lot of that same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was blocked by 8 people.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I forgot one more, two more. Or I got called disgustingly pathetic and a bog monster. I'm a bog monster because I'm so repulsive that
Wow, a
I'm a bog
bog
monster.
monster.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
So I
Okay.
got some colorful ones, and then I did have a guy, and it was a probably non-surprisingly, it was a pro pally person said that if they saw me in person, they would beat me to death with their fists. So
I saw
I
that
guess
one.
between you and I'm
Yep.
winning on death
And he
threats,
was
but
a
I think
Christian
my
too.
total
So,
then is 23. So you're winning so far.
well, of course I am. I
But there's
mean,
still time. There's time for
I
me to make up the ground.
oh, there's time, but I'm already picking out restaurants, so yeah. There's still time. But just know I'm feeling better this week. So, and you know how many response videos I have to be like the smallest creator ever. So,
Yeah. So, speaking of pro pallies, because I know that's something that's come up every
mhm.
week now, and they're the most.
Mhm.
Now, I'll clarify this in case I get canceled. It's not Palestinians, but the pro pally activists on TikTok. They're the most violent ones in terms of how they speak. Um, but we're going to talk a little bit about something that's going on with the ICC in Israel, and I'm going to hand it to you, Terry, to kind of run us through what's going on there.
Well, so I think everybody's aware of this, but basically, South Africa has decided to take Israel to The Hague, claiming that they are committing a genocide. Now, the thing to remember is people are getting real excited about this. But The Hague really has very little power. And one of the reasons this isn't as big a deal as that people think it is, Israel is not a member of the International Criminal Court. Neither is the United States. You have to voluntarily sign up so they can call you in there, but you don't have to do anything they say. You're not a member, right?
Hmm.
So, in case you're thinking that this is going to make some kind of change, just know that the International Criminal Court issued a ruling last year telling Russia to stop all military action in Ukraine. So we see how well that went. Russia
Yep.
completely ignored them. So went and read the transcript, and basically, South Africa's case sounds like every TikToker. It's just basically the same thing. There was an overreaction. That the intent of is to kill off all the Palestinians. This is an ethnic cleansing. They pulled out some guys who have said some radical things on the Israeli government. Some of them have been called to be removed. Some of them who've been fired. Some of them who aren't in the government anymore. The thing I found interesting about this case, and I think is really a slap in the face to Israel, is that the court ruled that no video footage from the October 7th attack by Hamas is eligible to be considered for evidence.
Interesting.
So they are strictly looking at what Israel has done from the time this started, but they're not considering October 7th. So to me, this is like going to court. Let's say somebody broke into my house and wanted to rape me, and I shot them. But you go to court and say, well, you can't tell anybody they broke into your house. We're just going to start from where you shot them. And I think it's a huge slap in the face.
Oh, yeah.
For the victims of October 7th. A huge slap in the face to Israel. To me, when they did that, I was like, all right, the People's Court would be a better forum and more legitimate than this crap.
Absolutely.
They didn't have a lot with me to start with. The other thing I think you need to consider is that when you look at South Africa, South Africa is not too great on their human rights record. They've got some of their own stuff. So first of all, they're ranked 8th in the world in murder. They're number 8 out of the entire world in murder.
And just to clarify, just for Terry, the first 7 on the list are all California cities, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I
they're
thought.
right after San Francisco.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah. And then actually they're number 3 in the world in rape. And for people who don't follow or keep up with South Africa, that has been a problem for years in South Africa. Sexual assault has been a problem for years in South Africa. From young girls on up, it is something that happens. It is not chased down. It is not really taken seriously. And it's insane, but it's number 3, and women have lived like that for years. And to me, that is, when you allow that to happen against half your population who are females, that's an ongoing crime against humanity in a crisis.
Oh, yeah.
And there has been a rape crisis in South Africa for over a decade. And the other problem South Africa is having, that they have been called out by even the UN and others, is there is an ongoing attack against white farmers there. Now, South Africa, they have a Dutch population that was there, and they own a lot of the farmland, not all of it, but a lot of it. But for the last decade, farmers have been being killed and robbed. And I am talking about in gruesome manner, crucifying them, crucifying children, burning them alive, torture. I mean, incredibly brutal. And the response is basically, there's open cases and nothing being done. So South Africa is the last group of people on this planet who need to be calling out anybody on human rights actions when they have an ongoing rape crisis against women that they don't care to address. They have an incredibly high murder rate that only continues to grow. And they have what some have called a genocide against their farmers in their own country that they seem not interested in fixing in any way. So I have a hard time taking South Africa seriously that they're offended by human rights violations.
Of course.
Because you've got some stuff to do in your own. Plus, poverty is rampant in South Africa. So a lot of people think this is them standing because they were an apartheid state. Here's some other things you need to know in the background. The leaders of South Africa met with the leaders of Hamas in early December. And I don't mean the leaders in Gaza. I mean the guys who stole the $8 billion in humanitarian aid and live in luxury hotels in Qatar, the guys pulling the strings. And keep in mind, South Africa's broke. Their infrastructure is failing. They need investment. So they met with Hamas. I tried to track down. I haven't seen where they've received any money from Hamas or Qatar or Iran. But I did find where they received a deal from the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union, who of course is dealing with Ukraine, wants America distracted. The Soviet Union is not a friend of Israel at all and never has been, has agreed to invest right before they brought this case $200 million in South Africa to fix their infrastructure. Yeah.
Wow.
So South Africa gave a no bid deal, and there's actually been like people have written about it, and reporters have written about it now in South Africa, where South Africa gave a contract to an energy group in Russia without considering anybody internal, so that they could come in and take over these plants, which will give them cheap electricity too, because Russia can buy that from them, and to invest $200 million, which South Africa has a hard time getting from other nations.
Yeah.
So this is not South Africa standing up for the downtrodden. This is South Africa taking a bribe from Russia to do this because it's a distraction that Russia needs. And this is South Africa supporting terrorists because Hamas is a terrorist group.
Yeah.
So I personally, I think the fact that they are not willing to listen to what happened on October 7th, there's no legitimacy to this at all. It's a joke if you're not going to listen to what happened before. And the last thing I'll say about this, Chris, which I find kind of repulsive and disgusting on the part of South Africa, is one of the first things they brought out in court is that Hamas can never be tried in that court, and their crimes can never be considered there because Hamas is not a state, right? Palestine is not recognized by The Hague. It's not considered a country, right? Even though it's a state. So because Hamas is not a military of a country, they can never be tried at The Hague.
Interesting.
So basically, South Africa went in and said, hey, you can't touch these guys. We're not going to acknowledge their crimes because they're not a military of, they're not part of a country's military. And then let's just look at what Israel did. And then these clowns in The Hague said, oh, yeah, let's do that. So it's a joke. That's what I think of this whole thing. I think it's a joke. And as Netanyahu said, I don't care what they say. I'm not listening to it. He doesn't have to. Just like Russia didn't have to. Just like Sudan has not. The Hague wants to try the guy who is in charge, has been running the genocide in Sudan, and Sudan has refused to hand him over. Nobody listens to them.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the update on that. I'm interested to see the outcome of the trial. I think that if they side with South Africa, this is really going to empower the Western propaganda ring of Hamas to think that they've done something. That's the only reason I think it has any real bearing.
Well,
but I don't think it'll stop Israel from tracking down Hamas.
Tori,
And it shouldn't.
Well,
this
reinforces why it's so important for people like you and I and other creators who do stand with Israel to be as loud as possible, because we have basically a global alliance that's really rigging the situation against Israel. And and people wonder why we speak out and why we care. I've even seen some people on the right say, why should we care what's going on? Because I think a lot of these people put this in the same category as the Ukraine-Russia situation. And by the way, even though I'm skeptical about the amount of aid going over to Ukraine, I'm not pro-Russia. There's a difference between being pro-Russia. I don't think barely any of us are pro-Russia. But we're not seeing, we're literally going to have, in my opinion, a big part of this cultural civil war that we're in is because of this conflict in the Middle East. We have an entire wing of the Democratic Party that's sympathetic to terrorism and Osama bin Laden. So this is affecting our cores.
Who are terrified of a Christian nationalist state and terrified of a Jewish state, but are fine with having Islamic states all over the world, which is incredibly oppressive and subjugates women and minorities, and is very violent against them. And look, I know people aren't a big fan of Dick Cheney, and he did some things I didn't like, but Dick Cheney said something back when 9/11 happened, and he was right, and he was one of the only people saying this. This is a cultural war. This is Western civilization versus the Middle East, Islamic civilization. This is what it is. Don't kid yourself. It's not about land. It's not about anything other than the survival of Western civilization versus an Islamic worldwide caliphate. He said, "Don't kid yourself," and he was right. I think he's right. And one of the things when I was a kid and I started studying history, I remember the Nazis came out and said, "Hey, we want to take over the world and set up the Aryan race." And America said, "Hey, that's none of our business. That's going on in Europe. We're going to ignore it." And then it came to our shores, and I thought, why didn't people believe them? I mean, when they said that and they started taking over other countries, you would think somebody would go, "Hey, I think this Hitler guy means it when he says he wants to take over the world. I think this clown's serious. Let's get a head start on this."
Totally.
Jihadists and Muslim leaders have said for years, our goal is a worldwide caliphate where everybody worships Allah. I don't understand why we don't believe them. I believe them. I believe them when they say, once we get rid of Israel, we're going back to Europe. We're taking back Italy. We're taking back Spain. We are spreading all over the world. We will have Sharia law. And why does nobody, everybody's like, they're just kidding. No, they're not.
Well, what I'd say is,
no, they're not.
Even if it can't physically and logistically happen, if enough people agree with the ideas of it, it enables it. So I think that's what we're seeing. Like, I mean, it's very possible that we'll never have a Hamas attack on American soil. God forbid, hopefully not. But even if
they're saying now that Hezbollah is here. That there are members of Hezbollah who are here.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is, even if that wasn't true, if we have any percentage of American citizens supporting that, that's a big problem for civic life here. Even if it's not a matter of terrorist attacks and violent acts, we cannot have a functional nation where any proportion of our population, even in principle, agrees with that.
And here's the thing: when people say, you have Western civilization, that's all white men and it's bad and blah blah blah. Go back to and look at any civilization, and you can compare them right now. Women's rights, women's voices, LGBTQ rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion were born out of Western civilization. Those things still do not exist under Islamic rule. Western civilization, even now, you cannot compare the level of freedom. And if you want to be a Muslim, have at it. I don't want to do it. And that's my problem, is you want to make me do it. Well, same problem I have with socialism.
One of the big tenets, I think, that of Western civilization is that you can be a Muslim. I feel like also, and not just Muslims, but Western civilization is the most colorful and diverse of anywhere on the planet. If you look at some of these kind of Slavic and Nordic nations, people will say, "Oh, they're so free." It ain't a picture of diversity over there. It's all blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. America has flaws, but we've allowed America to be very diverse. So when you're bashing Western civilization, you're also bashing the mechanism by which we were able to have such a diverse country.
Yes. And you're able to let me tell you something. You can come out and march in the street and scream that you hate Western civilization all day long.
And it's because of Western civilization. As long as you don't break and it's because of Western civilization that you can do that. Exactly.
Yeah, but in Iran, right now, if there are protesters being mowed down in the street, 60 of them executed because they don't like the government there.
Yeah.
That's the battle. In Western civilization, you can protest and scream and yell and do whatever you want. And everybody will be like, "I don't like it, but have at it." In Iran, you were hung in a public execution or you were mowed down in the street. That is what these people... And so the importance of Israel is that it's the empowerment of the idea that we can destroy democracy, we can take over the West, and we can begin to force this culture on everyone.
Yep.
And that is why Israel is so important. It is a beacon of Western civilization in a place that doesn't even allow women to drive except in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
So But yeah, so I don't think this International Criminal Court, other than empowering pro-Palestinians to scream more, or the Western propaganda ring of Hamas, it's not going to change what Israel's doing, and it absolutely shouldn't. It
Absolutely.
absolutely should not.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. And we'll see how this plays out. Um, I want to shift the conversation because we talked a lot about cultural issues both abroad and in the United States. I want to reflect for a moment because I guess today, when this is airing on YouTube, earlier this week, about a week ago, was Martin Luther King Day. And, I think
Yep.
the left thinks that we hate Martin Luther King and then we're all white supremacists, but it's actually not true, believe it or not. I like Martin Luther King despite the fact that he was black.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I see people are going to clip that out of context now and we're going to be canceled. No, I have great reverence to him, and I want to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
a couple of the words that he spoke because and kind of talk about where we are as a country relative to that.
Well, Chris, I
Yeah,
think, and also I think when you look at the broad scope of Western civilization and all the people who have had accomplishments, for any person, but especially Martin Luther King in that time in history, to change the thought process of our country and how we viewed it things speaks volumes to the man he was, right?
absolutely.
To seep into the conscience where every American now thinks differently about something because of your words is beyond accomplishment. And so there's no way that anybody can diminish how much Dr. King changed
Yep,
our nation for the better, because he brought awareness to something that people didn't want to look at. And to this day, we still reflect on his words and look at him. But to change the nomenclature, the literal culture that we live in every day, is a thing few people, no matter how famous and influential, have ever been able to do.
absolutely.
So he's clearly one of the most influential figures in our nation's history. Nobody can argue that.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about he had a kind of a two-pronged approach to civil rights. And the first is the obvious one. He wanted integration, right? The legislative victory of
Mm-hmm.
integration. And,
Mm-hmm.
and, and because that was, again, very radically progressive at the time. We think of it now, we take it for granted. But that was the first part,
Mm-hmm.
was the legislative success. But the bigger part that
Yep.
was in his I Have a Dream speech was about changing people's
Mm-hmm.
hearts and recognizing that that's
Yep.
the solution to racism long term. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not forcing the government to do things, but changing hearts. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation, and this is the part we've all heard, that they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The other part I want to read is this part down here. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, go to jail together, and stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. This is not about picketing the government to even out the
Mm-mm.
playing field. This is about changing people's hearts and minds and embracing each other.
That's the only change that can happen.
That's the only
Yeah.
change that can happen
You
because
cannot you cannot legislate thought and hearts. You cannot legislate feelings.
exactly.
You can make laws against racist behavior, but you cannot legislate against racism, because you cannot change how people think and feel. And so King was right that it
Exactly.
had to be changing hearts and minds, because you will never change. You will never legislate change, ever. So he's right, and that's right about everything today. And if you look at the LGBTQ movement, the LGBT movement, or LGB movement, that's really what it took, is changing hearts and minds, and the bravery for a lot of people hid. But I remember, and this wasn't that long ago, 20 years ago, which is not that long ago. I had started a job in corporate America, and me and this guy had been joking around, and there wasn't any kind of attraction on my part or his part, but we just hit it off as friends.
Hmm.
And so he was like, "Hey, do you want to go hang out and do karaoke?" And I said, "I'll go watch." And I remember he said, "I have to tell you something." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Please keep this to yourself, but I'm gay." And I said, "Okay, cool. Let's go do karaoke." But when you think about 25 years ago, that was something he was afraid, not that he would be fired, but that, it just was not something
He
he
was
wanted
afraid
people in the
he would lose a
workforce to know.
friend. That's what he was afraid of.
Right.
Yeah.
But the thing was, and I was like, that's fine. I mean, okay. That doesn't change who you are as a person. You're still funny, you're still honest, you're still caring. We're still friends to this day. Um, but the thing is, it took bravery, people like him taking that chance where they may not meet somebody like me who was like, I don't care. I still love you, you're still my friend. I still love you. Um, to be seen as human, to make themselves vulnerable, and to change people's heart and mind so they could say, hey, this person is really, just like me. That takes bravery, right? And so, because you change people's hearts and minds by being vulnerable and them getting to know you,
Absolutely.
not by yelling and screaming at them. And so it took a lot of bravery to move that movement and acceptance forward to where it is today. And Dr. King did the same thing by going out and encouraging the change. That's hard. Legislation is easy, but really moving a movement forward and reaching out to people and building relationships, especially if people don't want them or are prejudging you and you don't know what reaction you're going to get, that's hard. That's to be respected. That's to be admired. From Dr. Martin Luther King to the people who first started moving forward rights for the LGBT movement. That takes a lot of bravery, and we don't consider that today because they had to be vulnerable and say, this is who I am, and I need you to know me as a person and not judge me, on this one thing. So I think there's a lot to admire for people who start those and move them forward. Whereas today it's just a lot of screaming and I'm going to put in
Yeah.
laws,
Well,
which changes nothing.
absolutely. And I wanted to hone in specifically on, one of the big talking points on both sides of the aisle is critical race theory. And people seem to think that
Uh,
critical race theory is compatible with Dr. King's vision and basically the goal that we had. And even by definition, and this is what I want to go over, even by definition, critical race theory is
mhm.
not compatible with Dr. King's dream. And the reason is, what does
Yep.
it really state? That critical race theory, and this is on the NAACP site, recognizes that racism is embedded in laws, policies, and institutions that uphold and reproduce racial inequalities. And they think the solution, and critical race theory holds that the solution to racism in society is not us embracing each other in brotherhood. It's not changing hearts and changing minds. It's tearing down the institutions and structures of society and rebuilding them from scratch. Um, and that is the antithesis. Obviously, Dr. King wanted legislative victories because we had structural institutional racism
Mhm.
at the time of Dr. King. We had segregation. We
Yep.
had a lot of, we had redlining. We had a lot of those things that really
Mhm.
systemically impacted black people. And those
Yes.
are the things he wanted legislative victories on. Now that we've broken down those barriers and we still have this school of thought that's saying the only way to equalize society is to tear down everything legislatively and structurally, that's the opposite of what Dr. King wanted. And
Mhm.
I think without even having to debate the nuances of CRT, by its very definition, it's the opposite of what Dr. King wanted. And the reason I want to bring this up is I want to put somebody on blast. This is actually
Okay.
somebody that taught me as a senior in high school. She was an English
Okay.
teacher, and and probably back.
Why is it always the English teachers? Why is it always the English teachers?
I think because I mean, if you want my real answer, I think English is a very fluid subject that that's very
Yep.
discussion based. So you can pretty much teach texts however you want. All they have in front of them
Yep.
is basically the skills that you have to extract from the class, which are, critical thinking, reading, writing,
Mhm.
composition, things like that. But by whatever type of discussions you want to have that will lead the person to at least be perceived to have those skills, it doesn't really matter how they get there. So teachers make the class in their own image.
Right.
I actually had a professor, before I go into my teacher, I had a professor in my freshman year of college, and she ended up being trans. She looked kind of like a butch lesbian woman, but then I found out afterwards she was transitioning to a male. This was an English comp class. It was a class everybody had to take, and I was at a big university, so there were a lot of sections of the class, and the grad students who taught the class could kind of teach them however they wanted, and I literally wrote a paper for the class about BDSM and how if we hold a whip in our hands to whip our partners, that we're cyborgs. And I'm serious, this is actually the content we were being taught. And we also had an extra credit project where she told us to use a gender neutral bathroom.
You need to get your money back.
I know. So listen to this. We had an extra credit assignment where we were told to use gender neutral bathrooms only for a week. And then at the end of the week, to write about whether our gender identities had changed by using gender neutral spaces for a week. I'm not kidding. This was the class.
You got ripped off. You got ripped off.
And so anyway, we took this class, and
I had to read Shakespeare in English composition in college and write papers about it.
So at the time, this was considered. I think this was in 2014. I think this was still considered kind of fringe, so this wasn't the norm. Now this stuff has become the norm. So I'm going to pull up this website. These people, everybody on the left, they say CRT is not being taught in classes, right? That's what we're always told.
It is.
But we're always told it's not. We're told that it's a graduate school level thing. Because we're not being taught critical race theory as critical race theory.
Is.
It's being subliminally interjected into our other content. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment because we have this website called the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective. And it's a collection of woke teachers. And this is my teacher. I don't care. I'm putting her on blast. She can sue me if she wants.
She's on the internet. I mean, yeah.
And she's a lawyer too, by the way. So this is my teacher.
God.
And she did this interview. And I want to zone in on one part of it. Now, teachers will say, we're not teaching an agenda. That's what they all say. Well, there's no agenda. It's just we're teaching people to be accepting and open-minded. I want to zone in on a couple thing here. Walden notes, I have taught incredibly conservative children and incredibly reactionary children. I want them to at least see the other side. Sometimes nothing that I say or do can ever change their mind. So she's basically openly admitting here, I'm trying to indoctrinate my students with a specific point of view, right? There have been classes who will hold on to their white privilege no matter what kinds of radical text I put in front of them. So here's a teacher, this is a public school teacher, saying pretty much...
She said the quiet part out loud.
She's saying, I am indoctrinating my students with a specific one-sided point of view, and my goal is to actually have them change their fundamental worldview.
Yes.
That's what she's saying.
So that they agree with me.
Exactly.
Which is not teaching critical thinking. Yeah, at all.
Then she says, and ultimately...
She's brainwashing people.
Exactly. And she said, and ultimately, I have to respect their views because they are so ingrained. It was clear that there was nothing I could do. Did they see my side? Maybe, but I can't know. I just know that I gave them the material and I did the best I was capable of doing. I indoctrinated them to the fullest extent I could.
Extent, yeah. There's always those few you can't brainwash.
Exactly. So this, to me, I look at this, and this is part of a larger group of educators who have this point of view. This is a radical way of thinking that's not good. As you said, it's not teaching critical thinking.
No, and you're not in school to teach one side or the other. You're just supposed to be teaching kids facts, not what you believe or you think.
And notice how she's presupposing that all the kids are against her point of view. Because she's wording it as if it's me versus the kids, right? I don't know if you heard what I said.
Yeah.
Oh, I said, and notice how she's presupposing that they all have the opposite view as her. The way she phrased that, it's, I want them to see my side, and they're holding on to their white privilege. So she's coming in with an us versus them. These are
But she
these,
has no interest in people who agree with her seeing the other side.
exactly. It's these are
So,
my
wow.
these are my white privilege. By the way, I went to a very diverse high school. We were actually 40% minority. I think we were like 30, like we were like
Wow.
20% black and another 20 or 25% Hispanic. So we were already in a surrounding where half the people
Hmm.
didn't even have quote unquote white privilege. Yet she's
Right.
presupposing it's a me versus them, and I need to get them on my side. I think that's very destructive, and it's a perfect example of what's wrong with
Yeah.
education in this country.
Yeah. Because you're not there to teach a political agenda. You're there to teach children you're there to teach them history, how to read, how to critically think. I don't need my kids at school so they have the skills to get a job, not so that they think like you. I don't, I, if I had a child who came home and said, I am getting a degree in social justice, um, they're not. That's all I can tell you is no, you're not.
Not with my money.
Because that's not a thing. That's not a thing. There's no such thing as social justice. I read The Myth of Social Justice by Thomas Sowell, and the first thing he said is there can never be social justice because some people are born dumber than others. And he was more elegant, but basically that's true. Just the very fact that nature itself has said your IQ is higher than yours, there will never be full equality in total justice
Exactly.
because some people just are smarter than
Well,
others.
I saw Dennis Prager gave a talk on social justice, and he said something that really stuck with me, and that was, social justice isn't real justice because otherwise, why would you have to denote it as a different type of justice? It's just
Yes.
justice. If something is
Yes.
just, if something is just and something is
It's
good,
just.
it's
Yeah.
just justice, right?
Yep.
So why do you need a separate term? You're
Exactly.
acknowledging that social justice and actual justice are distinct and not the same.
But social justice, it can make you feel warm and fluffy because it's not called, you can pick an enemy, white supremacist, you can just declare them all bad, and you can say you're standing up for somebody without actually ever doing anything but just yelling. So it's just something to make you feel really good about yourself.
Exactly. And
That's all it
and
is.
that's the culture, unfortunately, that we live in. Whatever makes us feel good on a short-term gratification
Yep.
level is what we gravitate towards because it's how we're being conditioned and raised in this culture. And it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing.
No,
So I want
no.
to
That's why we have all these Western Hamas people.
exactly. So I think we'll end on that. I think we have as conservatives, we have great reverence for the true nature of Dr. King's
Yep.
message and what he was trying to do
Yeah.
and the progress made. That's all stuff we agree with. Despite
Absolutely.
despite how we're painted as these right-wing KKK members, we support true racial equality, equality of
Yeah.
opportunity.
I support these same rights and equality for everyone as defined by the Constitution. And
Absolutely.
I'm going to do a little teaser, Chris.
Yes.
I'm going to spring this on you. We talked about it a little bit, but next week, we're going to talk about social contracts
Yep.
versus the Constitution. This is something I've studied. So if you want to hear about this and you want to hear me rant, and I'm a pretty good ranter, tune in. That's all I'm
Absolutely.
going to say, Chris. Unless you have something you're going to talk about, you want to tease, I'm going to tackle the social contract myth next week.
No, I think that's great. We're going to talk about this next week, and we have a lot more stuff in store. And we want to thank everybody for joining us. We hope everybody had a great day off work and happy MLK Day. And thanks for tuning in to the podcast, guys.
Have a great day. Thanks, guys.
Take care.